What's going on, everyone? It's me back again. It's been a while since I've done one of these videos, but I've gotten a lot of texts and requests on social media asking for my opinion on the forecast. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to all of my loyal followers who have always asked me for my opinion on the weather. And it's been a while since I've done one of these videos, but I hope that this is everything that you want it to be. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Souza. I am a degreed meteorologist with 10 years of experience in the field, and I am also a certified consultant meteorologist through the American Meteorological Society. So just to take you through this forecast, let's first take a look at what actually happened today, which was a whole lot of nothing weather-wise, but behind the scenes, it was very hectic to say the least. So over the last 72 hours, it's been nothing but beautiful in terms of early February standards here in southern New England. A lot of our high temperatures today topped out in the mid to upper 40s, even touching a few 50s across areas in the Boston metro area. And so looking at this, it's really hard to kind of think about snow just because it was so warm, and all that nice sunshine and those warm temperatures also help keep the ground a lot warmer. So in terms of a really cold air mass, if we were in the 20s, this would be a game over, typical nor'easter, blizzard, classic, whatever you necessarily want to call it. But because it's so warm outside, temperatures are not necessarily conducive to producing a lot of heavy snow. So what has to happen is that this storm system, which it's currently moving its way through the Tennessee Valley right now, it really has to intensify off the Delmarva coast, really just off the coast of New Jersey. And originally what it was expected to do was really just expected just to kind of hug the southern coastline of Long Island and just pass just right along 40 degrees north latitude. And really over the last 6 hours or so, what has happened is that this storm has gone from tracking just south of Long Island to really shifting about 100 miles south of Long Island, which in turn is going to make the storm a lot weaker, produce a lot less precipitation. And because it's going to be weaker, we would really have to see some heavy snow rates, like 2 to 3 inches per hour, for at least a few hours in order to get the snow that they were talking about, which in some cases was over a foot across portions of Massachusetts. But if the storm really dives down deep here, about 100 miles, all of that goes away, and we're really just left with some light snow, and temperatures are not necessarily all that cold as you saw previously, so a lot of that snowfall would essentially melt, and therefore it would be a real bust of a system. So that's kind of been the hair-pulling trend this morning, really into this afternoon. And the worst part about it is that everybody and their mother has essentially messaged that this is going to be a very high impactful storm system. So to message all that, and then for the storm showing up in weather models to show something that is completely the opposite of what we originally forecasted is very disheartening. So I kind of want to just take a minute just to talk about what I think is going on from a little bit of a science background. So here you can see in this image here, this is basically the European model. It's one of the more favored weather models in the meteorological community. And here, this is 500 millibars. This is about 20,000 feet up in the atmosphere. And here is that upper level low. And upper level low is really just the parent to the surface low, which will impact us tomorrow. So this upper level low here, this was the European run for Sunday afternoon. And this was the first, or really when the models kind of started trending very much upward in terms of snowfall potential. So if we kind of go back just really to yesterday, here is where the upper level low was for this time. Right now it's 7 o'clock on Monday evening. So this is the model valid for 7 o'clock tonight, but it was ran back on Sunday afternoon. So here's where the upper low looks like. You can see how it's a little bit more elongated, and it kind of does like this little finger loop kind of on the border between Illinois and Indiana. Well, when we kind of fast forward 24 hours and we look at today, you can see how the low just looks a little bit different. It actually kind of is squished a little bit further to the south. It doesn't necessarily have that little finger hook that it did previously. And if I kind of just toggle back and forth between the two images, you can see how it's just slightly different, but that slight difference is going to change the entire forecast. Think of weather models behaving kind of like they do in Back to the Future. If you change one little thing, by the time you go back to the future, your whole life is going to be different because you just changed something very, very small in your past. It's what we call chaos theory in sciences, and it's exactly what it is in weather. So here you can see the two differences, even though they're very, very small. But when we kind of look at things right now, you can kind of see here is where the upper level low is, and here is Illinois right here, and here is Indiana, and here you can see where that little finger hook, you can see it a little bit better here, but here is that little finger hook, and that upper level low is not as squished as you saw on the run today. So here's what the run of the European model looked like today. Here is what it currently looks like. And this is what it looked like on Sunday. So you can kind of see the difference between what it looks like now, what it looked like on Sunday, and what it was projected to look like from the model run this afternoon. So you can see here that there is some difference, even though it's very, very slight, but there is some difference here. So if things remain the same from Sunday, this is basically what the whole storm system was going to do. This low pressure system was going to move through the mid-Atlantic and then basically follow the jet stream like so, and it was just going to hug the coastline. Here you can see that by the time we got to 1 o'clock in the afternoon tomorrow on Tuesday, you can see here, this is the upper level low, but the actual surface low is going to be basically passing somewhere in this general vicinity. But because the low has been forecasted to be suppressed a little bit more, when you move that model forward in time, so here's 1 o'clock in the afternoon tomorrow, and you can see here how the low is suppressed much further south. When you look at the two different models, you can see the distance difference, if you will, and it's really about 100 miles or so, which isn't a lot, but in the weather world, that's a huge shift. So that's a very, very interesting feature. Now, when you look at the sea level pressure, and remember, this is the surface low that will impact us tomorrow. Now, this surface low here is actually moving. This is the Sunday afternoon run for comparison. So here is a 994 millibar low, and here you can see where it is as of right now. This would be Monday evening at 7 o'clock our local time, and here you can see it's moving through the eastern portion of the Tennessee River Valley. And if we kind of just look at it for comparison, here you can see it is still a little bit suppressed to the south with today's model run. So if we kind of go back and forth, you can see how Sunday's low is a little bit further north and east, so it's a little bit faster moving, but the low is a little bit deeper. It's 994 compared to what it was modeled to today at 996. And then when you look at it for what it is right now, you can see here, even if I turn this off just so it's a little bit easier to see, you can kind of see where the center of that low pressure system is. Right now it's about 1,000 millibars, but again, it's moving through the eastern part of the Tennessee River Valley, really just kind of on the border between Kentucky and Tennessee. Well, when you compare that to Sunday's run, you can basically see here's where it is on Sunday's run, and then here it is on today's run. So you can see how it's a little bit further behind, and the placement is a little bit more off today than what it was on Sunday. So here is where the low pressure system is now. And if we kind of just used this and we looked at Sunday's run, and Sunday necessarily didn't change all that much, Sunday would essentially, if this ever loads, as you can see, Sunday would kind of take along that track here, and it would just hug the coastline. It would really intensify as it did so, and it would cause the storm to really intensify and cause some very heavy precipitation rates. So even though the temperatures for areas mainly south and east of the Mass Pike would be in the mid to maybe even upper 30s across the far south coast, like places like New Bedford and even into Plymouth, even though those temperatures would be a little bit more on the warm side, the storm would be throwing precipitation down so hard and heavy that it would basically cool the atmosphere so quickly that it would just be essentially puking snow. It's kind of the same phenomenon that if you took water and then you put ice cubes in it and then you basically swirled your water around so the ice cubes could actually cool the water. That is what dynamical cooling is. It's basically it's snowing so hard in the upper parts of the atmosphere, it helps cool the entire atmosphere down a little bit so that snow can start to stick back onto the surfaces. So here, this is where the low is basically projected to be. This is the Sunday run, and here you can see now here we are on Monday, and it was basically deterred a little bit further to the south. And by a little bit, I mean basically about like 100 miles or so. So this would stop any of those heavy snow rates from occurring. And so it would really just be some lighter snowfall rates. And with temperatures above 32, right in the mid to upper 30 range, it would be really hard for that snow to stick. And then by the time the atmosphere would cool down, this whole storm would be over and the precip would stop by the early evening hours. And then we would be left with very, very little snowfall amounts. So snowfall amounts have really been all over the place today. I've seen amounts that go over a foot. I've seen amounts that only put about 1.5 inches for the Boston area. So what are we actually going to get? Well, what I want to do first is I kind of just want to show you one more quick thing. Here is a conglomerate of a bunch of high resolution models. And here you can see here's that upper level low again. It does do that same finger hook thing kind of in the southern border between Illinois and Indiana. And here you can see if we kind of go back to what the current look of the atmosphere is, you can basically see that it basically models this quite perfectly. So this model is known as the HREF. It's just a conglomerate of a bunch of high resolution models. And so here you can see this was from earlier today, that it basically did that same track, and it tracked just very close to the southern border of Long Island, really just right along 40 degrees north latitude. So when you look at the surface analysis of this, you can see here that it really intensified and almost kind of looks like a mini hurricane, if you will, especially if you were to look at it on satellite. So this model today was really showing some very impressive amounts, anywhere between 18 to 24 inches across much of the state of Massachusetts, but I think that's very much overplayed, and I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. One model that I do like is called the National Blend of Models. It's really just another conglomerate of a bunch of different weather models put together, and what they do is they basically weigh this model and they weigh the best performing weather models, and they use that to kind of base this whole model upon, if that makes sense to you. But here is the latest runs. Well, first, I guess we can go all the way back. So you can see how snowfall amounts really since the 10th, which was on Saturday. So here you can see here was Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening, and then during the overnight hours going into Sunday. And here you can see how snowfall amounts have always been relatively high, where the lowest amounts have been across the far southern coastline, and especially the Cape and the islands. But since the whole storm has kind of shifted a little bit further to the south, you can kind of see how the axis of heaviest snowfall is really shifting further south and east, and that becomes much more apparent here with this afternoon run. Here's the latest and greatest from the National Weather Service in the Norton office, and I fairly agree with their forecast. I think it kind of takes into I think it takes into account the best of both worlds. I'm not entirely sure if we're going to see 8 to 12 inches here in this swath. It's entirely possible, especially if we get some heavier snow bands, but I think a widespread 6 to 8 here, or you could even do 5 to 8 in this area where this kind of light yellow is. I think that would be relatively appropriate, but I still think the Cape and the islands, they don't necessarily see as much, kind of just because they're already warmer anyways, and they always have some ocean influence. Then again, if the storm really, just tracks maybe not 100 miles south, but maybe it only tracks 50 miles south, then this solution would absolutely make sense. But I'm not too sure because there's been so much flip-flop back and forth. It's entirely possible also that this whole model run kind of moves a little bit more back north and west, and things kind of look like they did earlier on this morning, and where we had 8 to 12 inches really just, plastered across the entirety of Massachusetts with lower amounts across the South Coast, Cape, and the islands. in any way, shape, or form, I do think that we'll start off as a little bit of rain or wet snow mix across the south coast. So my friends in New Bedford, I wouldn't be surprised if you initially see rain at first, but then I think you then transition over to all wet snow. And this is going to be more of a heavier, wetter snow just because the temperatures are not necessarily frigid colds. So if they're in the upper or mid 30s, it usually means that it's going to be a heavier and wetter snowfall. So I think that these snow amounts will probably be on the lower end of all of these ranges. Here you can see, 4 to 6 for the Lowell area, and then it increases down to 8 to 12. But I think this is probably you're gonna see values a little bit more on the lower end of things. That's just my 2 cents, but I could be wrong in this aspect. Again, it just really depends on where the storm is going to track. But based off of comparing where the storm is right now and where the latest model guidance is and how it's performed, I think what the models did today is that they ingested some bad data and they had a little bit of a hiccup. And so I wouldn't be surprised, and it would actually be cool to see this tomorrow morning that the models kind of trend a little bit closer to the shoreline, which would increase snow totals for everybody. But it's been a very tricky forecast, to say the least. But regardless of the snow amounts, it's still going to be a decent amount of snowfall, I think, for most people. In a very worst case scenario, if you're a person who actually wants snow, in a worst case scenario, this storm continues to track further south and east. But I don't necessarily see that. I just don't, because if you kind of loop this a little bit, it's going to basically ride this little wave right here. And I just don't see how it's going to dive just completely south and east and, basically give us with absolutely nothing. I just don't see that being the case. I just don't see it in the modeling. So I think this is a pretty good idea from the Weather Service. I'm actually really on board with this. Again, I think it's going to be a little bit more on the lower end side. For my friends in New Bedford, I've kind of said all day, I think 5 to 7 inches or maybe 5 to 8 inches is a little bit more appropriate for your area. I still think that is a little bit more legitimate here. They can see New Bedford, it's kind of hidden, but they have 6 to 8 here for New Bedford, and I think a little bit more of a 5 to 7 is probably a little bit more appropriate, but again, I could be a little bit off. Anyways, it's going to be a plowable snow event. It comes in during the early morning hours, and so it might not look terrible, especially if you're out driving first thing in the morning, but as we get into the mid-morning hours and especially into the early afternoon, if the snow rates do become very, very hot and heavy, and it's snowing at 1 to 2 inches per hour for several hours, that's when you start to get snowfall really accumulating on the ground, because it's snowing so fast and so hard that it doesn't necessarily matter what the temperature is. It's actually going to cool the atmosphere and allow for more snow to accumulate on the ground. So that's just the forecast and how I see fit. I know it's a little bit long of a video, but I hope you enjoyed it, because it seems that you guys enjoy a little bit more of like the whole science and my whole reasoning and what I do. So if you have any questions, let me know. If you like the video, please give it a like. And if you found it useful and you think other people might find it useful, I always appreciate if you share the video as well. Enjoy your snow day for what it is tomorrow. Again, it is February, and I hope everyone stays safe out there.